The HOA didn't just cross a line. They marched right into my yard, chainsaws buzzing, and carved that line straight through my hedges. No warning, no permission, just the smug confidence of people who think rules only apply to everyone else. They said it was for the community view. They destroyed something I spent years growing because they wanted to look past my home. But they forgot something about me. I don't break easily. And when you corner someone who minds their own business, they turn into someone you should never provoke. So I gave the HOA a view they'll remember forever. A towering wall of rusty shipping containers. And hey, before we go deeper into this insane story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss another wild HOA nightmare. Peace has a particular sound. For me, it's the soft hum of morning wind brushing through the hedges I planted 5 years ago. Dense, vibrant, a living wall I cared for like they were part of the family. They turned my backyard into a private world, keeping noise, neighbors, and nonsense at a distance. But on that morning, the sound was wrong. I stepped outside with a mug of hot coffee, expecting to feel that calm. Instead, I heard buzzing, sharp, angry buzzing, coming from the side of my property. When I turned the corner, my heart dropped. My hedges, my beautiful, meticulously grown hedges, were being butchered by 2 men in bright vests. Branches snapped, leaves flew. The bushes that once reached up to my shoulders were now uneven stumps. And standing over the carnage was her, Marcia, the HOA president, the neighborhood's self-crowned queen of control. She stood with one hand on her hip and the other clutching a clipboard like she was holding a sacred tablet of rules. Her sunglasses reflected the chaos behind her like she was proud of it. "Good morning," she chirped, shouting over the chainsaws. "We're just making some necessary adjustments." "Necessary for who?" I asked, setting my coffee down slowly because I knew if I didn't, it would end up on someone's head. Marcia pushed her glasses up her nose. "The community. Your hedges were obstructing the view for the residents living behind you. The HOA voted to have them removed." I stared at her. Voted, without telling me, without even stepping on my property to ask. "Oh, we don't need permission when it comes to shared aesthetic standards." She actually smiled when she said that. The workers kept cutting. Branches kept falling. My patience kept burning. "Stop," I said. They didn't. I stepped closer. I said stop. This time the workers froze. Marcia sighed like I was a child having a tantrum. "If you have a complaint, you can file it in our online portal. Though I must warn you, we're backed up. Processing could take up to 10 weeks. 10 weeks. 10 weeks, while my property looked like a massacre scene. "And you think this is acceptable?" I asked. She shrugged. "Community harmony sometimes requires sacrifice." "Harmony. Sacrifice." She said it like she was doing me a favor. In that moment, the calm I usually had, the calm those hedges gave me, vanished. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just decided. If they wanted a view, I'd give them one. A big one. A loud one. A rusty, industrial, impossible to ignore one. I spent that entire day packing the house, replaying her smug tone in my mind, imagining ways to reclaim my space. I didn't want to do something illegal. I didn't want violence. I didn't want drama. I wanted impact. Something that made the HOA rethink ever touching so much as a leaf on my property again. And then the perfect idea hit me. Not small. Not subtle. Not polite. Shipping containers. Massive, sun-bleached, rusted, industrial shipping containers ready to be stacked like a metal fortress. By sundown, I had made the calls. By sunrise, a semi-truck was rolling into the neighborhood. And when Marcia heard that horn echoing down the street, the look on her face told me one thing. Round one goes to me. The semi-truck didn't just pull into the neighborhood quietly. It arrived like an earthquake on wheels. The ground trembled, windows vibrated, and every neighbor magically transformed into a detective, peeking through blinds and cracking open doors. The sound of those heavy chains clanking against the rusted steel echoed down the entire street like a warning bell. Marcia, HOA president, neighborhood tyrant, destroyer of hedges, was already marching toward me before the truck even came to a full stop. She had her clipboard raised like she was about to issue a ticket to the truck itself. "What is the meaning of this?" she shouted, pointing dramatically at the containers as if she'd caught them committing a crime. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting her rage simmer for a moment. "A delivery," I said calmly. "You know, something normal people receive." The truck driver hopped down from the cab, boots hitting the pavement with a metallic thud. "Where do you want 'em?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. I pointed to the spot where my Hedges had stood before Marcia's little demolition crew arrived. "Right along this line." The driver nodded. "Got it." Marcia nearly combusted. "You can't do that. You absolutely cannot put those things here." Her voice cracked like she was about to cry, yell, or summon demons, maybe all three. The driver raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, unless you own this patch of land, I'm unloading." Her nostrils flared. "I am the HOA president." He shrugged. "And I'm the guy with the crane." Without waiting another second, he signaled his crew. Hydraulics hissed, metal groaned, and then, boom! The first container dropped into place, shaking the street. A puff of dust shot upward. A car alarm in the distance went off. Marcia flinched so hard she practically hopped backward. The second container came down. Boom! Someone across the street whispered, "Holy wow!" The third slid off smoothly, landing with a deep, rattling thud that made the houses quiver. Three towering, 12-foot-tall, rust-covered shipping containers now stood proudly where my Hedges once had been, forming a wall so menacing, so unapologetic. It made the whole neighborhood feel like the entrance to an abandoned industrial site. Marcia stared at it as she just witnessed the end of civilization. This is a violation," she sputtered. "A massive violation." I shrugged. "These are decorative lawn items." "Decor what?" she exploded. "These are not decorations." I pointed casually to her own HOA handbook. "Anything under 12 feet is considered a decorative installation. Page 32. You know, the same rule you quoted when you removed my Hedges." She snatched the binder, flipped frantically, and froze when she saw the line. Her lips tightened. Her eyes twitched. You think you're clever," she whispered. "I don't think," I said. "I know." She took a step closer. "This destroys the neighborhood aesthetic." I smiled. "Good thing community harmony sometimes requires sacrifice. Your words, not mine." Her jaw clenched so tight I thought she might shatter her own teeth. She spun around, heels stabbing the asphalt with every furious step. "This isn't over," she snapped. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting." I leaned against the container wall, crossing my arms as she stormed away. "Make sure to optimize the view on your way," I called out. She didn't turn around, but I saw her shoulders stiffen. And in that moment, I knew exactly what she was thinking. The HOA wasn't backing off. They were gearing up. And if this was their opening attack, they had no idea what I was willing to do next. The emergency HOA meeting wasn't just a meeting. It was a full-blown neighborhood spectacle. By late afternoon, cars lined the street in front of the clubhouse, and people wandered in with the kind of energy usually reserved for courtroom verdicts or gossip about a cheating spouse. Everyone wanted to see what Marcia, the queen of rules and ruin, was going to do about the Great Container Wall. I didn't plan to attend, but curiosity eventually won. I walked in quietly and took a seat in the very back. The room buzzed with whispers, side-eyes, and badly concealed excitement. Even people who hated conflict were here, pretending to be offended but obviously thrilled to witness this chaos live. At the front of the room, Marcia stood behind a folding table like it was a presidential podium. Her clipboard was stacked with papers, sticky notes, and what looked like legal printouts. Clearly, she had spent the last several hours constructing a battle plan. She adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat dramatically. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice trembling with righteous fury. "As you all know, we are gathered here today because one homeowner has created a monstrous obstruction on our street." Someone in the back whispered loudly, "It looks kind of cool, though." A few people snorted. Marcia's eyes shot daggers toward the crowd. "This structure," she continued, tapping her papers so hard they bent, "is not only aesthetically offensive but potentially dangerous. It violates the spirit of our community guidelines." I raised my hand, but not the actual rules, right? Her jaw tightened. "We're handling comments at the end." I leaned back, smiling. She was already cracking. Marcia clicked a remote and a projector flickered to life. Suddenly, the wall of containers appeared on the screen, larger than life. She'd taken photos from every angle, morning, noon, evening, probably in the middle of a meltdown. "This," she said, pointing at the image like it was a crime scene, "is a hostile act, a deliberate eyesore intended to intimidate and disrupt the harmony of our neighborhood." Someone spoke up. "Didn't we cut down his hedges without telling him?" Marcia's head whipped around. "That's irrelevant." Another voice added, "I don't think it is." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. A few people nodded. Others looked uncomfortable. Even some of her loyal board members shifted in their seats. For the first time since I'd known her, Marcia looked uncertain. She slammed her papers onto the table. "The point is, we must restore the neighborhood standards. We cannot allow this rusty barricade to stand." I raised a hand again, not waiting to be called on. "You mean the barricade I built because the HOA chopped down the perfectly legal hedges I planted on my own property?" "You are blocking the community view," she snapped. "And now I'm enhancing it," I said. Laughter rippled through the room. Marcia's face turned pink. She grabbed a paper from her pile. "I have consulted with a contractor," she declared, lifting the paper like it was holy scripture, "and he confirmed that these containers may violate municipal safety codes." I stood, "May violate, or do violate?" She hesitated. It was small, it was quick, but it was there. "They may," she admitted. "So you don't know." More whispers, more shifting. More doubt is spreading like wildfire. "I intend," she said loudly, "to request an official inspection, beginning tomorrow morning." There it was, her next attack. I nodded slowly. "You do that and I'll be ready." The meeting dissolved into mutters and side conversations as people filed out. Some patted my shoulder on their way. Some whispered advice. Some just shook their heads in awe of the madness. But I walked home with a different feeling, calm, focused, prepared. Because I had already planned for this. What Marcia didn't know was that those containers weren't just sitting there. They were anchored, reinforced, secured by professionals who knew exactly how to make something indestructible. If she thought an inspection was going to scare me, she was about to learn something important about me. I don't play defense. I play offense. And the HOA had no idea what was coming next. The next morning arrived with an unusual silence, one of those heavy, suspicious silences that feels like the world is holding its breath before something dramatic happens. I stepped outside with my coffee, already expecting trouble, and sure enough, trouble drove straight toward my house in a white city-issued truck. A man stepped out wearing a reflective vest, a hard hat, and an expression that said he'd much rather be at home. He held a clipboard, of course, and walked toward the shipping container wall with practiced boredom. Before he could knock, Marcia marched up behind him like an angry rooster. She looked too excited, like this inspection was Christmas morning for her. "Good morning," she chirped, practically vibrating. "We're here to address a significant violation." The inspector turned to me. "Morning. I'm just here to check the installation for safety concerns." I nodded politely. "Of course, let me know if you have questions." Marcia shot me a glare, like politeness itself was offensive. The inspector walked around the containers, running a hand along the rusted steel, tapping corners, checking the supports underneath. He crouched, scribbled something, stood, circled again. Marcia hovered over him like a mosquito, waiting for him to deliver the devastating verdict she imagined. After nearly 10 minutes of silence, she cracked. "Well," she demanded, "it's obviously unsafe, right? It's rusted, terrifying, unstable, ugly." He held up a finger. "Ma'am, please let me finish." She folded her arms, nostrils flaring. He walked back to me. "Did you install these yourself?" "No," I said. "A professional outfit handled it." He nodded. "Because the anchoring is done properly. Overkill, even. Whoever installed these knew exactly what they were doing." Marcia blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" The inspector glanced at her briefly. "They're secure, not going anywhere." That can't be right," she sputtered. "Look at them, they're unsightly, they block the neighborhood's view." "Ma'am," he said with tired patience, "I'm not here to evaluate the view. I'm here to check whether they pose a safety risk." "But they should be unsafe," she blurted out. The inspector raised an eyebrow. "You want them to be unsafe?" Her face went pale. No, I mean this is a hazard." He flipped the page on his clipboard. "Actually, they're compliant. There's no violation here." I took a leisurely sip of my coffee. "Would you like a copy of the receipt and installation report?" The inspector shrugged. "Not necessary, everything checks out. If there's nothing else, I'll file the clearance." Marcia opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Words failed her in a way I had never witnessed. She looked like a computer freezing mid-update. "But no, wait," she cried, stepping in front of the inspector. "You don't understand. This wall is an act of aggression. He's trying to intimidate the community." The inspector sighed. "Ma'am, please take it up with your HOA. My job is done here." He tipped his helmet to me. "Have a good day, sir." As he walked back to his truck, Marcia spun toward me with pure fury swirling in her eyes. "You think this is funny?" she hissed. "A little," I admitted. "You won't get away with this. I'll take this to the board, the county, the city, whoever it takes." She stomped away, but I noticed something new in her step, not confidence, desperation. The neighbors watching from their porches exchanged glances. Some whispered, some smiled, a few gave me a discreet thumbs up. But even with the inspector's clean report, I knew Marcia wasn't done. She wasn't the type to quit. She was the type who escalated, and she had just realized she couldn't beat me with rules. Which meant she would try something bigger. Something personal. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the container wall, I noticed something odd, small pieces of paper tucked into my mailbox. Not bills, not flyers, letters from neighbors. Some supportive, some angry, some afraid. And one of them had only 3 words written on it. "She's planning something." The war wasn't slowing down. It was about to explode. The night after the inspection, I barely slept. Not because I was worried, far from it, but because I could feel the tension in the neighborhood. Every creak of a door, every whisper from a window, every distant bark from a dog sounded like a warning signal. Marcia was plotting, and I knew better than to underestimate her. By morning, the first signs of her escalation appeared. A fleet of cars, board members, and HOA minions rolled into the street, forming a small convoy. Some of them waved papers like banners of war. Others stared at me with a mix of fear and indignation. I stepped onto my porch, coffee in hand, casually surveying my domain, the container wall gleaming in the morning sun, completely untouched. Marcia emerged from the lead car like a storm cloud, her heels clicking rhythmically against the pavement. She carried a binder stuffed with evidence, though it was unclear whether it was legal documents, printed emails, or angry doodles she'd made while stewing overnight. She fixed me with the gaze of someone convinced she could bend reality to her will. "I'm here to enforce community standards," she shouted. Her voice carried down the street, forcing neighbors to peek out. "These containers are an eyesore, they violate policy, and they must be removed immediately." I smiled, stepping fully onto the porch. "Funny, that's exactly how I felt when you destroyed my hedges. Funny how rules only seem to matter when it benefits you." Her jaw dropped, but she quickly recovered. "You will be fined. This is illegal. I will escalate this to the city council if necessary." I sipped my coffee. "Feel free. But before you do, maybe you should read the installation report from the inspector. Every box anchored, every bolt tightened. Compliant in every way. Safety standards perfect." She waved her binder wildly. "Compliant, my foot. It's a threat to community morale, to our view, to our aesthetics." From the corner of my eye, I noticed neighbors taking photos, phones aimed at her dramatic gestures. One kid whispered, "She's losing it." I smirked. Even the most loyal HOA supporters were starting to hesitate. Marcia tried a new tactic. "I've called in a city inspector for tomorrow. He'll see that this wall is unacceptable. You'll be forced to remove it." I nodded slowly. "Excellent. Can't wait to see how he reacts to 3 tons of anchored steel." Her face twisted in disbelief. "Anchored steel?" "Yes," I said. "Professionally installed, completely within code. The wall is legal, sturdy, and completely unmovable without heavy machinery, which I happen to have access to." Marcia's shoulders stiffened. She was clearly calculating. Every step she had planned, every tactic she thought would intimidate me had already failed. And now, for the first time, I saw fear flash in her eyes. The neighbors whispered among themselves. Some laughed quietly, some shook their heads in admiration. Even the board members looked uncomfortable, realizing they were watching Marcia push too far. She stomped her way back to the lead car, muttering about fines, city officials, and next steps. It was clear she was both furious and terrified. For the first time, she had met someone who would not bend. I watched her leave and took a slow sip of coffee, letting the sunlight hit the rusted containers. They weren't just a barrier anymore. They were a statement, a warning, a fortress that said, "You don't mess with me." And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. The real battle was still coming, and it would test every ounce of patience, creativity, and nerve I had. The next morning felt heavier than usual, as if the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. Word had spread fast. Neighbors peeked out of windows, some whispered, some took videos, and others walked by pretending to take a morning stroll while secretly watching the container wall like it was a battlefield monument. I knew Marcia was planning her ultimate move. The question was, could she even pull it off? By 9 a.m., she arrived in full regalia, clipboard, folder, sunglasses, and that same furious march that once terrified everyone. But this time, she wasn't alone. 3 other HOA board members followed her, carrying measuring tapes, cameras, and stacks of paperwork. They were determined to force me to remove the containers. I stepped onto my porch, coffee in hand, casually observing them. "Morning," I said. "Lovely day for a civil discussion." Marcia froze for half a second before snapping. "Civil discussion? You think you can mock the HOA after everything? This wall is illegal. You will remove it immediately or we will escalate." I tilted my head. "You mean escalate to what? Another inspection? Fines? Oh, don't get me wrong, I love fines. They're like IOUs for the universe." Her face turned red. "Enough with the jokes, this is serious." I stepped closer to the edge of my porch, letting the morning sun hit the rusted steel of the containers. This is serious, for you, for me, not so much. The board members huddled together nervously, whispering. It was obvious even to them were realizing Marcia had overplayed her hand. One of them glanced at me and muttered under his breath, "He's prepared for everything." Marcia tried intimidation. "I've called the city inspector. He'll declare these containers unsafe. You can't win." I smiled. "You mean the inspector you sent before, the one who said everything was compliant and anchored?" She froze, "But he'll find something this time." I shrugged, "Then let's see." By noon, the city inspector arrived, a calm, unflappable man who walked straight to the containers, clipboard in hand. Marcia practically bounced behind him, ready to unleash a tirade. He circled each container, measured every corner, checked the steel, and scribbled notes meticulously. He crouched, tapped, scratched, and inspected like a detective solving a case. After a long, suspenseful pause, he straightened up and turned to Marcia. "I see no violations. These containers are structurally sound, properly anchored, and meet all safety codes." Marcia's jaw dropped. "No, that's impossible." "Impossible or inconvenient?" I asked, leaning casually against the porch railing. Her face twisted with frustration and disbelief. You think you can humiliate me?" "I don't think," I said, "I know." The inspector nodded politely at me. "Everything checks out. There's nothing more to report." Then he walked back to his truck and left. For the first time, Marcia was speechless. She spun around, muttering threats about fines, board meetings, and community outrage. But the momentum had shifted. Neighbors peeked from their windows, some clapping quietly, some whispering their admiration. She realized she had been outmaneuvered. I took a long sip of my coffee, glancing at the towering rusted containers. They weren't just walls anymore. They were symbols. A fortress. Proof that standing your ground could defeat even the most ruthless HOA president. Marcia stormed off with her board members, defeated but still furious, muttering vows and plotting her next move. I knew she would return eventually, but for now, the battle was mine. I leaned back and smiled. Finally, peace. My property is intact. My containers are unmovable. And one unforgettable message sent to anyone who thought they could control me: you don't mess with someone who refuses to be bullied. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal, but whispers of my container wall would travel for months, maybe years. And every time someone glanced at it, they'd remember. Sometimes the quietest homeowners pack the loudest punch. And as for me, I took another sip of coffee, smiled at the sunrise reflecting off the steel, and whispered to myself, "Mission accomplished." Because Marcia wasn't done. She never was. And the HOA, they weren't just a nuisance anymore. They were a full-blown opposition force. But for now, I had the upper hand, and I planned to enjoy every moment of it.